Imagine yourself in a world of roaring crowds and golden palaces, a world where power is everything and survival is a brutal game. This is the story of a girl who rose from the deepest darkness to command an empire, a story that begins in a place of unimaginable cruelty. Even in ancient Rome, a civilization known for its violent gladiator games, there was one spectacle so shocking it was outlawed. Yet, in the great hippodrome of Constantinople, this very ritual played out nightly before 80,000 screaming people. Children, some barely 10 years old, were forced into performances that were less like theater and more like torture. Trained animals would claw and bite at their small bodies as coins rained down on them from the audience. To the crowd, it was thrilling entertainment. In truth, it was a massive, organized system of abuse on a scale never before seen. And from this nightmare, a young girl emerged who would one day rule it all. Her name was Theodora. Theodora's life fell apart with a single death. Her father, Acacius, was known as the bear keeper. His job was to train enormous brown bears for the violent shows in the hippodrome, and this role gave him a secure position within the powerful Green faction. In the year 504 CE, the city of Constantinople was ruled by two massive rival groups, the Blues and the Greens. These were far more than sports teams. They controlled everything from jobs and wealth to the law itself. Your life was defined by which one you supported. For Acacius and his family, their place was safe, until he died suddenly. By tradition, his widow and 3 young daughters should have been protected. His job should have passed to them, securing their future. But corruption got in the way. A man named Asterius, the Green faction's dancing master who controlled entertainment jobs, accepted a bribe. He gave the bear keeper position to someone else, abandoning Theodora's family and leaving them with nothing. Theodora's mother was faced with a horrible decision: watch her daughters starve or offer them to the hippodrome's brutal machine. She chose survival. In a moment of public shame, she dressed her 3 little girls as supplicants, placed wreaths of laurel on their heads, and paraded them before the massive crowd. This was a silent announcement. These children were available for services the law openly defined as prostitution. The Greens, whose greed had caused this disaster, coldly turned their backs. It was the Blues, their rivals, who took pity. They gave a job to Theodora's stepfather, saving the family. Theodora would never forget which side had shown them cruelty and which had shown mercy. That memory would fuel her thirst for revenge for the rest of her life. By the time she was 10, Theodora was performing in shows so vile they disgusted even Romans who were used to bloodshed. Her speciality was called Leda and the Swan. She would lie naked on the stage while trained geese pecked barley seeds from her body. To the roaring crowd, it was exciting. To her, it was simply how she stayed alive. Thousands of men threw coins at her exposed skin. But the real horror happened off-stage, in back rooms where children as young as 8 were forced to serve senators, merchants, and aristocrats. Byzantine law explicitly labeled actresses as prostitutes, making this abuse not just expected, but legal. For most, this life shattered their spirit, but Theodora was different. She watched and she learned. Night after night, she saw how powerful men, senators, judges, wealthy merchants, lost all their control, dignity, and reason because of their own desires. What destroyed others became her classroom. The hippodrome became her university. Every humiliating act taught her about human weakness, desire, and how to manipulate it. She learned that men who thought they were strong could be easily undone by their own obsessions. This was the education that would create the most dangerous woman in Byzantine history. For 6 long years, Theodora endured this life. By 16, she was the most sought-after woman in the hippodrome, not just for her beauty, but for her sharp mind. The same senators who once tossed coins at her now paid huge sums for private time. They thought they were buying pleasure. In reality, they were feeding a predator who was carefully learning how to ruin them. Then an opportunity arose that would lift her from an exploited child to a powerful companion. A man named Hesebolas, the Syrian governor of Libya, came to Constantinople. He was immensely wealthy and powerful. When he saw Theodora perform, he didn't want her for just a night. He wanted to own her completely. He offered her the role of his concubine. For Theodora, this meant escape from the hippodrome and a life of luxury. After 6 years of degradation, it seemed like salvation. She approved. For nearly 4 years, she lived in Hecebolus' palace in Libya. But this was more than just a life of comfort. It was an advanced lesson in control. Hecebolus believed he owned her, but Theodora studied his every flaw. She learned which desires shamed him, which fantasies he could not resist, which pleasures clouded his judgment. The governor who commanded armies became helpless when she controlled his access to gratification. The dynamic she had seen in the hippodrome was now her weapon. But she went too far and began influencing his political decisions. When he realized her manipulation, his rage was explosive. "Get out, you worthless whore," he screamed, throwing her belongings into the desert sand. After 4 years of power and comfort, she was thrown out, humiliated, and sent back into the world of trafficking. Yet this betrayal became her most important lesson. The journey back across the Mediterranean hardened her into something new. Ship by ship, she sold her body to survive. But now, every man who thought he was using her became another subject for her study. A Roman merchant who paid for conversation, she drew out his trade secrets. A ship captain who offered free passage, she uncovered his smuggling routes. Every encounter added to her understanding of how male desire could be turned into power. By the time she reached Alexandria, she had transformed. She was no longer a victim, she was a predator. In Alexandria, she found religion, but not for salvation. She converted to Monophysite Christianity under Patriarch Timothy III. This wasn't about faith, it was a strategy. For the first time, she was building a power base outside the world of exploitation. Then in Antioch, she met Macedonia, a dancer for the Blue faction. Macedonia carried rumors back to Constantinople, rumors that a 40-year-old prince named Justinian had been asking about a woman who had survived Libya. Stories had spread of a girl who had endured the hippodrome, manipulated a governor, and survived exile. When her ship finally approached Constantinople's harbor, Theodora looked upon the golden domes of the city that had once thrown her away. But she was not the same helpless child. Theodora had been remade, hardened into a weapon. The city that had once cheered for her humiliation was about to kneel to her power. Constantinople, 522 CE. Prince Justinian, the heir to the Byzantine throne, was at a court gathering when he first saw Theodora. To him, she was just another beautiful former performer. He had no idea he was looking at a woman who had spent 16 years mastering the art of destroying powerful men. The seduction began at once, but this was no ordinary romance. This was a battle. Theodora used every trick she had learned. She studied his desires, turned his weaknesses into her weapons, and made intimacy a form of control. She discovered Justinian's hunger for intelligent conversation, a skill she had perfected with merchants on her sea voyages. She found his need for emotional connection, the same vulnerability she had once exploited in Governor Hecebolus. Every private moment was calculated. Every whisper, every touch was designed to bind him to her more tightly. Within months, Justinian was completely captivated. He believed he was in love. In reality, he was being programmed. For Theodora, each meeting was a lesson in controlling a man through his desires. For Justinian, each moment pulled him deeper into dependence. He didn't realize it, but his political judgment was already being clouded by the woman beside him. When he announced he would marry her, scandal shook the empire. Byzantine law was clear. A former actress could never marry a man of high rank, let alone a future emperor. The law existed to keep entertainers forever locked out of power. The Senate was outraged. "You would marry a prostitute?" they sneered. To them, Theodora was unworthy of the throne, but Justinian could not let her go. His obsession was too strong. The real obstacle was Empress Euphemia, the wife of Emperor Justin. She had risen from slavery to the highest position a woman could hold, and she knew exactly what Theodora represented, the use of intimacy as a weapon for political conquest. "I climbed up from slavery," Euphemia declared before the court, pointing at Theodora, "but I was never a prostitute." The confrontation was electric. Two women who had climbed from nothing stood face to face. Euphemia saw the danger and fought to block the marriage at every turn, forbidding reforms and shutting Theodora out of court. Then one cold night in 523 CE, Euphemia died in her sleep. There was no warning, no illness, no witnesses. The timing was too perfect. Theodora had once learned from other women which herbs could disable or kill, which poisons left no trace. Whether by chance or by calculated murder, Euphemia was gone. Within hours of her death, Emperor Justin drafted new legislation. It allowed former actresses to marry men of high rank. The law was so specific, it might as well have had Theodora's name written on it. 2 years later, in the Hagia Sophia, Theodora walked down the marble aisle dressed in imperial purple. The same woman who had once lain naked on the hippodrome floor now stood as Justinian's wife and future empress. Every step was a performance. Every glance was theater. The child who had been sold for coins had turned her exploitation into a crown. Their marriage was unlike any other. Theodora was not just his wife, she was his partner, his obsession, his co-ruler. And then came the test that would show how truly ruthless she had become. In January of 532 CE, Constantinople exploded into chaos. For the first time, the blues and the greens, normally bitter enemies, united in rebellion. Their battle cry was simple, Nika, meaning conquer, but their rage was not just about taxes or laws. Their fury was aimed directly at one person, the empress who had risen from prostitution to power. Death to the whore, they chanted. Fires ripped through the city, the Hagia Sophia burned to the ground, the Senate House collapsed in flames, blood ran through the streets, soldiers changed sides, even Justinian's own bodyguards began to waver. The rebels crowned a new emperor, Hypatius. The empire was on the edge of collapse. Inside the palace, Justinian's advisors begged him to run. Treasure chests were already being loaded onto ships in the harbor. Save yourself, they pleaded. Abandon the city, escape while you still can. But to run meant abandoning Theodora. To run meant letting go of the woman who was the source of his power. Then Theodora stood up. Her silk robes whispered as she rose before the terrified council. The air was thick with smoke and fear, and candles flickered in the haze. My opinion, she said, her voice cutting through the silence, is that this is no time to run, even if it would mean safety. Every eye turned to her. May I never be separated from this purple robe. May I never live to see the day when people do not call me mistress. As for myself, I agree with an ancient saying, royalty is a fine burial shroud. Her words froze the room. She had endured beatings, humiliation, and degradation in the hippodrome. This mob was no different from the men who had once screamed for her body. She understood crowds better than anyone alive, and now she used that knowledge to bend Justinian's will. Emperor chose massacre over retreat. Her plan was brutally simple. Generals Belisarius and Mundus would trap the rebels in the hippodrome during their victory celebration. The same arena where Theodora had once performed degrading acts would become a slaughterhouse. As 100,000 people packed the stands, soldiers slammed the gates shut. The killing began with cold efficiency. Swords cut through bodies, spears pierced flesh, screams echoed off the stone walls. Families were cut down where they stood. By the day's end, 30,000 corpses littered the arena floor. Theodora had turned the hippodrome, the stage of her childhood shame, into the site of her ultimate revenge. After the massacre, Justinian rebuilt his government. In 535 CE, a new decree required all governors to swear loyalty not just to him, but to Theodora as well. For the first time in Roman history, a woman was officially recognized as co-ruler of the empire. The child who had been forced into prostitution was now the master of the men who had once bought her. From her private rooms, Theodora created what historians would call a parallel government. But it was more than that. It was a spy network unlike any other. Trusted men and women moved through the palace halls, collecting secrets. Who was having an affair? Which senators had shameful habits? Which officers could be blackmailed? Theodora turned gossip into weapons. Fear became her currency. In public, she demanded that every visitor kneel and kiss both her feet and Justinian. This wasn't about respect. It was about domination. The humiliation she had once suffered was now reversed with deadly precision. In 537 CE, Pope Silverius refused to support her religious allies. Theodora didn't argue, she destroyed him. Through General Belisarius and his wife Antonina, she fabricated charges of treason. The Pope was accused of conspiring with the Goths and sent into exile where he died. He was eliminated not by theology, but by the same tools Theodora had used since she was a girl: fear and manipulation. This was only the beginning. Theodora's next target was even more dangerous: Queen Amalasuntha of the Ostrogoths. Amalasuntha was everything Theodora feared. She was royalty by birth, dignified, and worst of all, an intellectual rival. She had been exchanging letters with Justinian that read less like politics and more like flirtation. Theodora recognized the signs, the careful words, the late-night reading, the subtle seduction through ideas. It was her own strategy used against her. She could not allow it. Through an ambassador named Peter the Illustrious, she whispered poison into the ear of King Theodahad, Amalasuntha's cousin. Soon after, the queen was murdered while bathing, naked, defenseless, and destroyed in a scene designed for maximum humiliation. Theodora's message was clear: if she could not control intimacy, she would annihilate it. Her most brilliant takedown came in 541 CE against John the Cappadocian, the Praetorian prefect and one of the empire's most powerful men. John was dangerous because he understood manipulation. He was immune to her usual tactics, so Theodora turned to psychological warfare. For 6 months, John received terrifying gifts: wilted flowers symbolizing death, tiny daggers hinting at assassination, paintings of executions. Each delivery was meant to unravel his nerves. Slowly, he began to crack, losing sleep, jumping at shadows, sweating with paranoia. She was recreating the same torment she had endured as a child in the Hippodrome, but now she was the one in control. Finally, she sprung her trap. Working with Antonina, Belisarius's wife and her most trusted ally, Theodora arranged a fake conspiracy meeting that implicated John's own daughter. Spies recorded his every word. Caught in treason, John fell from the heights of power to die a beggar on the streets of Egypt. The lesson was clear: Theodora didn't just destroy her enemies, she unmade them. By now she had mastered the art of ruling through fear. Her private chambers became a shadow court where secrets were traded like money. Every senator, every general, every bishop knew the empress had files on them: their desires, their affairs, their weaknesses. She had the power to ruin anyone. This was the empire she built, one where manipulation was the law and humiliation was policy. But Theodora's most lasting power was not in assassinations, it was in law. Together with Justinian, she reshaped Roman law in ways that still echo today. Her fingerprints are all over the Corpus Juris Civilis, the foundation of Western legal tradition. Her reforms read like the vengeance of someone who had survived the worst abuses. She outlawed forced prostitution. She ordered brothels closed if they prevented women from leaving. She made rape punishable by death, no matter the victim's or attacker's social rank. She expanded divorce rights for women. She ensured that a rapist's property would be transferred to his victim. Each law was not just justice, it was payback. She was carving her pain into the very fabric of the empire. And yet her reforms also revealed her darker side. She established the Metanoia convent, where former prostitutes were forced into religious life. She controlled their bodies just as hers had once been controlled, ensuring their choices were still hers to make. Even in liberation, she demanded domination. Theodora also mastered the politics of bloodlines. She arranged marriages, broke alliances, and punished families who defied her. She understood that bloodlines could be manipulated just like men. Every union was a chess move. Every child was a piece in her plan to keep her influence alive long after her death. On June 28, 548 CE, Theodora died at the age of 48, likely from cancer. Her death shattered Justinian. The emperor who had commanded armies, rewritten laws, and ruled the world's greatest city collapsed into despair. He never remarried, he never recovered. For 17 more years he sat on the throne, but the fire was gone. His rule without her was weak and hollow. The woman who had controlled him in life controlled him in death. The greatest proof of her influence is what happened after she was gone. During her life, Justinian had enacted sweeping reforms, crushed rebellions, and expanded the empire's power. After her death, little important legislation was passed. The brilliance of his reign had not been his alone, it had been their partnership. When she was gone, the empire began to drift. In the Basilica of San Vitale in Ravenna, a mosaic still shows her in dazzling robes, larger than the other figures. She wears imperial purple embroidered with images of the Magi bringing gifts to Christ. It was her final act of theater. The trafficked child, the prostitute, the empress, was now immortalized as a holy figure equal to biblical royalty. From the hippodrome floor to the throne of Rome, she had rewritten her story in stone. Today, tourists walk through the hippodrome where Theodora once lay naked for coins. They take pictures on the stones where 30,000 rebels were slaughtered on her command. They gaze at mosaics that show her as divine. Few understand the brutal truth. The girl who was once sold for entertainment became the most dangerous woman in Roman history. She proved that horrific practices don't only create victims, they can forge predators who use their trauma as a weapon. Her reign was built on the psychology of abuse. Her empire was ruled by the lessons of exploitation. Her legacy reminds us that the line between victim and destroyer can be terrifyingly thin. Theodora's story is a warning. Childhood suffering doesn't just break people. Sometimes it creates monsters capable of breaking empires.